Shalom Aleichem and welcome. We are going to learn now the Sicha on Pashas Matois in Chelik Yud Ches Sicha Beis. Chelik Yud Ches Sicha Beis in Pashas Matois. This is a Yisodistic Sicha in Pshat, in Halacha. It gives us the perspective, the view of what Hagolas Kalim is all about, Kashering Kalim, and even more about Kashering Kalim, principal ideas in Halacha, what Tfilas Kalim is all about. When and why do you have to dunk a Kali into a mikveh when you buy it or you get it from a guy? And the Rebbe is going to ask three practical halachic questions about this and change the whole outlook of why and when the person a yid is mechuyev to do Tevilas Kalim. All right, so it's in Chelik Yud Ches Matos Beis, page 363. In their parsha, wo Eden zayin mistaber geworden auf die Dinnen from Hagolas Klei Midyan, and today's parsha, where the Jews were commanded about the halachas of kashering, extracting the non-kosher taste from the spoils of the vessels that the Yidden came back, the utensils the Yidden came back after the war of Midyan. Fret the Ramban. The Ramban has a basic question. This is not the first time the Yidden had a war, and I'm sure every other war they also came back with spoils. Why did the Torah tell us the halachas of kasher and kalim ersh by milchemes Midyan, only here after the Yidden came back from the war against Midyan? Why the same issue came up earlier? The discussion should have been mentioned, the halacha should have been mentioned earlier. Where? So the Rebbe says, by milchemes Sichem va'oig, the war against Sichem va'oig, was oich von zei haben die Yidden genommen shalo, and I'm sure, as the pasuk states, that the Yidden came back with spoils. And the Rebbe in the parentheses says, when they brought back goodies, they didn't just bring back gold and silver. I'm sure they came back with utensils. So the question already came up in the previous war. Yet the Torah doesn't tell us anything about kashering there. Only here, after they came back against the war from Midyan, over here the Torah tells us the halachas of Hagolas Kalim. Why is it that way? That is the question the Ramban asks. When the Ramban verantwortet, and the Ramban answers, as Eretz Sichem va'oig, when they conquered the land of Sichem va'oig, Menachlas Yisrael, that was what belonged to us. And as the Gemara says in Chulin, during that period of time, Huter lahem kol shlalom, everything that they got from Sichem va'oig was permitted to them. Afilu ha'yisurim, even what's supposedly usher to a Jew, that those items at that time was not prohibited yet. But Amar Rabbi Seinu, as the Gemara says in Masechta Chulin, Kadli de Chaziri ishtari lahu. It's either Kadri or Kasli. Utensils that had the taste of Chazir, or even Chazir itself, at that period of time was yet permitted to them, because it was still Nachlas. It was all Nachlas Yisrael. Avo Midyan, however, now that they're fighting Midyan, it didn't belong to them. The only reason they fought against Midyan, it's only to take revenge for a bad behavior that Midyan did towards the Jews. So because it was a goyish thing, therefore, when we won the war against Midyan and we came back with Kalim, it was their Kalim with their bad things that are prohibited to us. So now the issue of kashering comes up. This is what the Ramban says. And the Rebbe, it's very interesting that the Rebbe says, the Rebbe is going to ask a bunch of questions there. And the Rebbe, you don't find this often. The Rebbe makes reference in the Ha'ara 5, the second Ha'ara 5, that once we got into this topic, somebody brought me a sefer called Tevilas Kalim, which is a very popular sefer. And the Rebbe says that he sees that the author of that sefer addresses this question and gives many, many answers. And some of the answers are already discussed in the Sicha. Fragim Mefarshim, so the Mefarshim ask on this Ramban of them. In them parshas, in Eden angesagt waren nicht nur auf die Dinnen von Geuli Kelim Shalachim. In our parsha, when the Torah says that you have to kasher the Kelim that you got from the Goyim, you got from the Midianite, there's besides the kashering of the Kelim, there's a second part, a second halacha that's mentioned. And the second halacha is nor oich of tfilas kelim shalachim. That whenever you buy a keli, you get a keli from a guy, you have to dunk it into the mikveh. The Rashi brings the star up. Rashi explains it in our pasuk. Wie der Ramban allein is no meirich in them, and the Ramban himself explains that there are two halachas: the halacha of agolas kelim and the halacha of tfilas kelim. So the answer that Ramban gave only applies maybe concerning the Hagalas Kelim. The reason that the kashering didn't apply till now, because till now everything was permissible. Oh, this is the first time they came back with something prohibited. But even a brand new Keli that belongs to a guy with no prohibited taste still has to be brought to the mikveh. So the mikveh issue should have been brought earlier. So why don't we find that the mitzvah of Tvilas Kelim shouldn't be mentioned earlier? Where earlier? By Mechames Sichem V'Oig. And you can't give me the answer that Ramban says, wie bei der Din von Hagala, as you answered by the Kashring. As by Mechames Sichem V'Oig is afilu katli de chazeri ishtarlu. You can't use what the Gemara says, that at that point, even pieces of chazer, even taste of chazer was permitted, because it has nothing to do with the taste of chazer or not. While there time from Tevilas Kelim, the reason why we even have to immerse and dunk a keli into the mikvah is nitzulim dem iser versus bolu in the keli. It's not because the keli has some prohibited taste inside. How do I know that? Says the Rebbe. The halacha is you buy a brand new keli, never used before, but you buy it from a goy, it has to be dunked into the mikveh without the issue of the prohibited taste. And so why are we dunking it into the mikveh? The Yerushalmi says that the reasoning behind the mikveh, because it's leaving the domain of a goy, and enters the kedusha of a yid. And for that, to make that change, you have to go through the procedure of a mikveh. So that was something that really applied even by the previous wars. So why isn't the mitzvah of Tevilas Kelim mentioned earlier? Even if we accept the Ramban's hesber, that is only a hesber for the Hagala, but not for Tevilah. Says the Rebbe, Unagam as the Ramban schreibt gleich vor dem. And even though the Ramban also mentions a point about Tevilas Kelim that might hint to an answer to this, the Ramban says, "V'libi maharer oid loymar shatvila azu midivrayim." The Ramban says, I'm leaning to believe that the whole concept of Tevilas Kelim is only midrabanan. Hagalas Kelim is minatera, but Tevilas Kelim is midrabanan. V'hamikra, it's mentioned in the pasuk that it should be brought into water. Asmachta asu, I say. It's just the Rabbanan found the pasuk on what to lean it on. So if it's only a rabbinical thing, maybe since the whole mitzvah is rabbinical, the question doesn't come up why it's not mentioned earlier. Says the Rebbe is aber nit muvan. Still, that's not a good enough answer. Why? Aleph, number one, the Ramban Fer Tachuis, the Ramban himself concludes v'zeh tzarech Talmud. I still have to think about it. I still have to study is it true that the conclusion that the mitzvah of Tevilas Kelim is not minat Torah? Das heißt, is besafik. He's still in doubt. Meglach as das is midairaisa. He's still thinking maybe it's minat Torah, and if it is minat Torah, why wasn't it mentioned earlier? Beis afilu ev der mikra is not an asmachta, and even if it's only a remez, a hint to what to lean on, that you have to put kelim into the mikveh, doesn't answer the problem. you still have the same question. Why is this asmachta only in the later wars? Why wouldn't we find this asmachta in the earlier wars? Why is it only an asmachta mentioned by the war against Midian, or not by Milchemes Sichem v'Oig? Gimel, uvecholoifen. Either way, whatever you say. Favos is that Ramban garnet meir wegen them. At least mention to discuss the question. Why Tevilas Kalim? He only asks why Hagalas Kalim is now and not earlier. He doesn't even bring up the Shaila. Why Tevilas Kalim wasn't mentioned before? A very powerful question. In other words, in short, the mitzvah of Tevilas Kalim, whether it's Minat Torah or Midrabanan, why did it only come about now in the war of Midian, not in the war of Sichem v'Oig? Beis, l'chayra v'ot me'yekam fa'emfren, l'chayra, you could have answered like this. Says Yodua, it's well known, no big deal. Asanit ala mitzvahs ayin gegeben gevarin gleich by Matan Torah. You go through the Chumash, you'll see not all mitzvahs were given right by Matan Torah. As eine voran kama mitzvahs as ayin gesagt gevarin in später the Gizman. We find many mitzvahs that were only given later. How much later? Because afilu b'shnas ha'arbaim. There's some mitzvahs that you only got 30 some years later, at the end of the 40th year, when they're about to enter Eretz Yisrael. 30 some years later, 39 years later, now there's a new mitzvah. 39 years after Matan Torah. Al derech, for example, Parshas Nachlis. The halacha with the story of Bnei Slavcha, when they introduced the halacha of how inheritance happens when there is no sons, versus the Shchadish Gevarin Speter, that only came about durch Bnei Slavcha, which was at the end of the time of the Midbar. So because mitzvahs didn't all happen, weren't all commanded at the time of Matan Torah, it came with time. Ubemela, Hotnit came Artzifreg, and therefore perhaps the question doesn't make sense. What would be the question? Why wasn't this mitzvah of Tevilas Kalim mentioned earlier? Where earlier? By Milchemes Sichem v'Oig. That's your question? Says the Rebbe, it could be at that point there was no mitzvah. Just like Nachlos only happened 40 years later, maybe the mitzvah of Tevilas Kalim only started now. While Esh by Milchemes Midian is Gekumen Desman only during the war of Midian. That's when the time came. But this is the Schadish Gevarim, when it became new, their Inyan, this mitzvah of Tevilas Kalim. Val derech, similar to what Chazal say, Nitna Torah v'nischat sha'alacha. New halachas came about with the time. So maybe that's the answer to the question why Tevilas Kalim is only mentioned here. If that's the answer you're going to give for Tevilas Kalim, the same answer should apply for Hagala. The reason why Hagala, Kasher Kalim, is mentioned by the Milchama of Midian and not earlier is because now is when the mitzvah came out. And yet the Ramban doesn't say that. The Ramban is bothered by the question and he has to give a roundabout answer. Says the Rebbe, und das was der Ramban fragt, we find that the Ramban does ask the question concerning Kashering Kalim. Maybe he could have said the same svara as by the Tvila, that it just happened when the mitzvah was just Neschadish. Is a Stafar, it's different because that's different. Vala says Muchrach Zuzam. You're forced to say, as their din for Usabalua, it must be that the fact that a person has an issue with absorbed taste of prohibited food, as das was is nivla gevarin for an advar iser, an item that absorbed taste of a non-kosher in the keli is aser. We already knew that's a problem, and not only it's a problem when aser the keli, and it ruins the keli that absorbed the taste. Is showing event freer. That we can't say it was just Nischadish. It must be that from Matan Torah on we knew that. Why? Why is this different? Why is the kashering, the taste and the keli a given, but the tevila of a keli might have been later? Says the Rebbe, it had to be even far Milchemes Midyan, even before the Milchemes Midyan. How do we know that? It states in the Friedrich Parsha, it says it earlier in Parsha Sav, when the Torah speaks about the karbanos and how the procedure and the process of how you prepare a carbon. So it says that the utensils that you use for carbon A, because carbon A has a time limit by when it has to be used and eaten and taken care of. So all the kalim that are used past that time, all the taste that's absorbed in the keli past that time ruins the keli. The Torah says, "Ukli cheres," a earthenware keli, asher tevashel bay, which will be used to cook a holy matter, because you cannot extract the taste from that earthenware keli. Yishaver, it has to be broken. If, however, you cooked in a copper keli, then umarak v'shutav b'mayim. Then it could be the process of how you can clean it with heat or water. I'm not getting into that. But already earlier, by the issues of karbanos, which was given to us in Matan Torah, which is given to us mentioned in the Parshas Tzav, we see that taste in a keli is a problem. Taish Dart Rashi. Rashi explains, why does the kli cheres have to be broken? Yishaver, says Rashi, because the taste of the carbon that absorbed in the keli cannot be taken out, and it stays there post the time when the limit for each carbon has, it becomes noiser. You're not allowed to eat noiser. Umarak v'shutaf. However, if it's a copper keli, you could do a process of extracting it. Live like espliyase, because a copper keli, you could extract the taste that went in there. It's obvious from that din in Parshas Sav, as their inyan from the Isser Balua, that the whole discussion of taste that's prohibited, that's absorbed, is showing Gevem far from freer, was already mentioned earlier. It's not something new. So we can't, therefore, Hagalas Kalim is already from Parshas Sav, from Matan Torah. And this is not the first war. The issue came up earlier by the war of Sichim Va'ay. Tevilas Kalim might be different. And the Rebbe in Ara 16 says, and it would be pushing it to say that the Parshas Sav is talking about kachim, karbonis. Oh, for kachim taste, we have an issue how that the taste that gets absorbed, how you get it in, how you take it out, but over here, Isser, maybe we never knew about. Says the Rebbe, that split is a doichit. Back into the left column. And since we knew already about the issues of Balua earlier, Frek the Ramban, so that the Ramban has right to ask, if so, why only when we come back from Midyan, we have the Kalim, we came back from Midyan, only over here we realize there's a problem with the Kalim. Unit by the Friedikimo, the same issue could have been the previous time when Eden Hamaranga Krang Kalim was Darfam Gil by Melchemes Sichim Vaig. The same issue came up earlier when the Yidden came back with spoils of utensils from Sichim Vaig, and over there too there were taste of Isser. So by Hagalas Kalim, the Shaila could have been earlier, but maybe Tvilas Kalim, it's just a new mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, as his upper Nachalznit Glati. That's not a smooth answer. To say that Tvilas Kalim just started and there's no need to bring it up earlier is not a smooth answer. Why? And since the Ramban discusses both halachas, side to extract the goyish taste, the kashmir, and also speaking about, he asks why is only mentioned here. At least say an answer that is applicable to the Tvila. Your whole answer only answers a half a problem. Only answers the Ge'ulei Nachim. At least mention something. Say them chila canals. Mention that this is no issue because this could have been later. Was is dort zwischen sei? The difference between kashering and toiveling. Was the Rebbe fragt nor auf die Ulei Nachrim und nicht auf Tvila. Maybe once he mentions it, you'll understand why the question was only about kashering and not by toiveling. But the Ramban doesn't say anything, as if you're supposed to figure it out on your own. Unal derech zeh, says the Rebbe, and similar to this, and perhaps you say Remazu even more, is nit moving in them was under the Mefarshim for Ephraim. While we're at it, says the Rebbe, I definitely don't understand other Mefarshim's answer for this question. This question for Vosman and Manhattan Ungazak, why the mitzvah of Tvila only came about now and not earlier. I'm reading other answers, and none of the answers satisfy me. Besides the problems that there are in every one of those answers, and the Rebbe in the parenthesis says, and I don't have to go through every answer and telling you the problems with every one of them, is though the Shaila Klolis. Let's just stick to the general question. The Ramban, who did open the can of worms about Haggalah, say something why it's not relevant. It is relevant. L'gabe Tvila. Why is he ignoring the whole topic as if it's a non-shaila whatsoever about Tvila? In other words, why Tvila is now and not earlier is not even a topic to discuss. Why not? So the Rebbe says in Ois Gimel, that man das verstehen, behaktem noch zwei Tmias in dem Inyan von Tvila scale. You'll understand this based on two other basic fundamental questions about the concept that we find relevant to Tvila scale. And when I ask you these questions, it will take you towards a certain direction that will give you clarity on why Tvila scale is different than Haggalah scale. Aleph. As is Yadua, was the Noid of Yehuda and the Chasam Sefer schreiben. It is well known what the Noid of Yehuda and the Chasam Sefer write, as when man verkauft am Chametz and the Goy for Pesach, that when one sells the Chametz to the Goy for Pesach, now listen, you're selling him Chametz, so if you're selling him lakshin and whatever, bread and cookies, so it's sold to him, by Pesach it's not yours, after Pesach you get it back, good for you. But if you're selling him your dishes and your utensils, so it now became the Goy's. When you get back the utensils from the Goy, you just acquired it from a Goy. Every time after Pesach, you should have to go to the mikveh and dunk in and immerse, dip all your kalim into the mikveh because you just got it from a Goy. So to prevent that, the Noid of Yehuda and the Chasam Sefer write, as when me verkauft dem Chametz to the Goy for Pesach, that when you're selling the Goy Chametz for Pesach, so man nit verkaufen the Kelim Chamutzim. Don't sell them the utensils. Why not? By Dalmod, they darfen Teufels and by Zurückkaufen they from the Goy nach Pesach. Because if you sell it to him, you'll have to, after you get it back after Pesach, you'll have to put all your equipment, all your utensils back in the mikveh. Right? It makes sense. That's the shita of the Noid of Yehuda and the Chasam Sefer. Says the Rebbe, aber in Nusach Shtar Mechira from the Alter Rebbe, I look, there's the text, the outline text of the Alter Rebbe writes what a Shtar Mechira should look like. The Shtar Mechira, the Chametz to the Goy, and you read the quote, you read it through, you'll see that he says, Shteit Keshribim, it's clearly written, well, what are you selling to the Goy? Even the kalim that have chametz be'ein, even those I'm selling to the guy. Das heißt, as euch die kalim wären verkauft zu guy. Von deswegen, says the Rebbe, even though the Alter Rebbe held you could sell the chametz, the keli, von deswegen, nevertheless, gefimt mit it, as the Alter Rebbe so sudden, we don't find anywhere that the Alter Rebbe holds, as nach Pesach, darf man teufel time the kalim. I haven't seen anywhere the Alter Rebbe should write that after Pesach, you should dip all your kalim back into the mikveh, because you're getting it from a guy. The Rebbe in Ara 21 brings that the Stei Chemet says, maybe it's different because we all know that I'm selling it to him for Pesach, and we all know I'm buying it back. So because we all know buying it back, it's like a quick business. Maybe it never became the guys. So the Rebbe says, "Oh no. There's no way you could say that because we believe we can't allow a trickster business here. If you need to get rid of the chametz and it cannot be yours during Pesach, it's totally sold to the guy. And if it's totally sold to the guy, then when you're getting it back, you're getting back a goyish item. There's no tricks involved. So why wouldn't the Alter Rebbe say you have to put it in the mikveh?" And the Rebbe back, and the Rebbe says, forget about the Alter Rebbe doesn't write that you have to go to the mikveh. Ma'aser Rav, I see the Rebbes. I know for a fact what the Lubavitcher Rebbes did as men is a nittovel. And I see that Chassidim in general, after Pesach, just open up the cupboards, use their kelim, and they don't take it to the mikveh. Why not? So this is a general question about Tevilas kelim, because this is going to shed light on what Tevila is all about. And the Rebbe says like this: in Shara Kailo, for Emphater, in the Sefer Shara Kailo, he answers like this: as the Alter Rebbe Zok. Since the Alter Rebbe says, Kelim Muchumatzim Sheyesh Aleim Chametz Be'ein, since the Alter Rebbe speaks about which kelim am I selling to the guy? I'm selling to the guy the kelim that there are chametz in them. There are chametz in them. And the din is, and yet we know that the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says, as kol kelim she'ena reitzel achshiram, kelim that you don't want to kasher, sarich l'shafshefam. If you want to leave it around your house, you have to clean it and scrub it, ladichem, and wash it. Shelo yehein chametz nikar behem. So the chametz should not be noticeable. And that's the only way you could keep it. And now we're seeing that I'm selling to the guy chametz sheyesh boy kelim sheyesh by chametz be'ein. So the meila kum tachais, from the fact that those are the kelim that I'm selling to him, comes out as di kli suda loy nimkru klau, that these utensils weren't really sold. Why? Vival says einen rein from chametz be'ein, the ones that are clean from chametz be'ein, I don't have to sell. I just have to rinse them off, wash them off, and make sure that they're not chametzdik. Unor klei suda zayin chiyavim in tvila, and only the ones that are usable as klei suda, those are the ones that I have to bring in the mikvah. So maybe that's the way around. How? Because those are not usable, they're not klei suda because there's chametz be'ein. Maybe the whole issue of mikvah doesn't apply. Says the Rebbe, but that tiritz is not moving. I don't get that answer b'chlal. That din from sarich l'shavshefam, the din that you have to scrub and clean the pots, but tzitzich doichav ala kelim, applies on every kelim. Uvibal as the kelim v'sarich l'shavshefam. And since the rule of the kelim which you have to scrub is nichlal in the mechira, the ones that have to be scrubbed are not sold. Pavelcha zayin es kelim was mefakayt in chametz. So I don't get which ones am I really selling. The Sharakayla is not clear with his answer. He's saying the ones that are loaded with chametz, I can't sell anyway. It's only when there is no chametz. And the ones on no chametz are not really. But which ones am I selling? So the Rebbe is saying, as in Shtar Mechira Bavartman, the Shtar Mechira is somewhere in the Shtar, it's hidden. Even if for whatever reason you didn't scrub the taste out, and still even that keli, if you sold it to the guy, is fine. If so, is the chadra kushli duchta. The original question is back on. Muzmen zogin. The bottom line you're forced to say, as chutz kli shuda sheyesh aleim chametz be'ein, that even though that the klei suda, usable kelim, that have chametz, very nichlal in the mechira from goy, they are all included in the sale to the goy. And from das wegen, and nevertheless, darfen ze l'shitas hagmar zoten kein tevila nit haben. Yet the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention you have to put it in the mikveh. So this is point number one. The Rebbe asks. Point number one is about Tevilas Kalim, that we find that there is a time when you're getting a keli from a guy, and yet you don't have to put in the mikveh. When is that? By the kalim that you give to the guy during chametz. And the question is why? And when you'll understand why you don't have to dunk that in, you'll see a special chiddush about the concept of Tevilas Kalim. One raya. Another question, base. Eina from the time in my minig so esem achali chol b'yom aleph the Chag HaShavuos. One of the reasons that's mentioned in halacha why we eat milchik on the first day of Shavuos is that l'zecher the ma'chali chol v'asidim am gegessen of the tag from Matan Torah is to commemorate, to remember that the first day of Matan Torah, the first day of Shavuos, the Yidden must have eaten milchiks. Why did the Yidden have a milchik meal on the first day of Matan Torah? As I've mitzvah shchita time even this topic about we Ruben could call them for mitzvahs by Matan Torah, since the mitzvah of shchita was only given to them like the majority of the mitzvahs during Matan Torah. So today they just found out the new mitzvah of shchita. So what happens to all the kalim that they used till now? And when the meat that they had till now didn't have shchita, so all their meat dishes from before became prohibited. Kalim and all the meat dishes from before all became prohibited. Why? Because before Matan Torah, they weren't obligated in shchita, and they weren't obligated in shchita. Maybe even if they did it, they didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Before then, they weren't commanded, but from now on, they couldn't eat anything that had a tafshel shel basar and Michael. And they couldn't just do it today, shecht it, and kalim, and also clean up their kalim and start a new fresh fleshik menu. Why? While the kula alma b'Shabbos nitna Torah, because everybody agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbos, and Shabbos you can't do shchita. And on the bottom, the Rebbe also brings that the halacha says that Shabbos you can't kasher kalim. Besides the point, the Rebbe in Ara 28 will say that even if they did shecht maybe before, but before Matan Torah, if they shechted, they weren't obligated to shecht, so they're not kosher. They did. It's like non-mechuyev people doing things that they're not mechuyev to do. Therefore, when they got the Torah on Shavuos, they were only able to eat milk. That's the reason for the minig. One of the reasons for the minig of eating milk. Says the Rebbe, I don't get it. L'chayra them fragging. L'chayra, you can ask a question. You answered me how they could eat, why they did not eat meat. Because you can't shecht on Shabbos, you can't use the kalim on Shabbos, right? How did they even use the milchik menu on Shabbos? And what's the answer? Milchik, I don't have to shecht, but you want to use the kalim, right? What's the problem with the kalim? The problem with the kalim is it's a goyish keli. Until now they weren't Jewish; they just became Jewish, and since they just became Jewish, I have to go to the mikveh first. So the Rebbe says like this: and it will be pushing it to say, it won't really help me to say maybe they only had cheese, milk, butter, cold stuff, but they didn't use the keli, the old keli, to cook. That would be pushing. To say they only use cold stuff would push it. And another question, if you're telling me that they only ate milchik and butter and nothing else because you couldn't use the kalim, the minhag should have been that way, that when today's Shavuos, we should only eat milchik and butter and not all these baked goods and cooked goods when it's not how it was. Ubechol leifen, besides all this, nevertheless, says the Rebbe, they obviously had to kasher all their milchik dishes from before. Because they didn't have milchik dishes before, so they had to find kosher. They definitely had to kasher the dish. They definitely had to kasher the kalim, because until then nobody worried about non-kosher or taruvas basa b'cholo. So how were they allowed to use the dishes for milchik and not for fleishik? Is a snisken kusha? That's not a question, says the Rebbe. Well, it's late because that makes sense to say, as a reis geindik from Mitzrayim, as they were leaving Mitzrayim, wissendik as by Mitzrayim tavdim zelakim al harazeh, the Yidden knowing when they left Mitzrayim that the purpose of Yitzias Mitzrayim was to serve Hashem by Matan Torah. So already then, Zayin eating given nizar in mitzvahs. The Yidden already started being careful more in mitzvahs. Oichem basa b'chala. Even in the mitzvah of basa b'chala. Uvemela. Maybe from then on, maybe they had milchik designated dishes. And the milchik dishes did not become fleishik, did not become basa b'chala. On top of this, the Rebbe is very practical and says, and besides, there are certain utensils that fit better, are only used for dairy, are not used for meat. Says the Rebbe, okay, so we dodged one bullet about the kashering of the keli. How did they use milchik when they didn't kasher the keli? Maybe. But it says, oh, but move on, but I'm stuck with another part. You answer the question, maybe they didn't have to kasher the keli because maybe they're using cold, maybe they used milchik kalim, whatever. Val in Zay is nit given came b'li sister because there was no taste of Isser in the keli. But by Matan Torah zayin dachidin narayin in kedushas Yisrael. We only became the Jewish people by Matan Torah. So at this point, all the dishes you didn't have to put into the mikveh first. From free Evans, because before Matan Torah they didn't have the holiness of a Yid, and now they became Am Yisrael, they should have to bring everything into the mikveh. Is harder on kosher leduchte, so the question comes back on. So how does it help that you're eating milchik? How does milchik help? You still need a keli that didn't go to the mikvah. And the Rebbe in Ara 2 says, and maybe they, Ara 32, and maybe they did put all the keli in the mikvah. Says the Rebbe, number one, I haven't seen it being written anywhere that the Yidden by Matan Torah went to the mikveh with all the kalim. Number two, it's a machlekes b'chlal. Remember, Matan Torah was on Shabbos. It's a machlekes b'chlal. If you're allowed to be, just like you're not allowed to be hagol on kalim Shabbos, there's a discussion. Not many opinions hold you're not allowed to be toivel a kalim Shabbos. And the Rebbe says, okay, maybe they use the keli without the mikveh. Because sometimes at one-time usage, you could use a keli without mikveh. Says the Rebbe, that too is a doichik. Ois Dalid. Bigeret Filmo, as mentioned many times, Kemen Arislam from Pirush Rashi al Torah and Yonim Mefloim. You could learn from what Rashi, how Rashi explains a pasuk. You could learn wondrous halachas and drushim and mefarshim. You could even prove a halacha from the way Rashi explains a pasuk. Even though Rashi says that his main objective is to teach pshat, but the fun is moving as mekanet paskin halacha from yonei halacha, was menet aris from Pirish Rashi al derech pshat. But usually we say you can't paskin a halacha from a pshat Rashi. From deswegen, nevertheless, there are still single places where Rashi bringt that up in Yonim, where Rashi quotes points. Nit midas atzmai, not something on his own. Nor Shem Rabbi Seinu Darshan, when he quotes it from the sources, but the fun is moving just by the way the Rashi writes his Pirush in certain places is understood as Agam das is a dash versus negayet pshuta shel mikra. Even though it's a teaching that's primarily telling you what the pshat in the pasuk is a sabaoich ois gehalten in the oif in the limud for Rabbi Seinu Darshu. It obviously still has a place in the Rabbi Seinu Darshu, also a derech halacha. It obviously could teach us something in halacha too. And says the Rebbe, this is one of those places. When you analyze the words of Rashi, you could see a phenomenal halacha of tefillas kelim. It's oich oich benidin and dan. So too in this situation, in the Bir B'Kol Amel, the explanation about the whole issue of tefillas kelim, Muvam will be understood from Pirish Rashi da in unser parsha. When you analyze clearly the words of Rashi, you'll see, even though Rashi is pshat, you could learn many halachas from his structure of how he wrote his pshat on this issue. When Rashi brings up the minion from Tevilas Kelim, when Rashi quotes and discusses the matter of Tevilas Kelim, or if Diverta, when Rashi, the heading to this discussion, the Rashi quotes the words of the pasuk, Ach b'meinida yischata. So what does Rashi say? Zokter, lefi pshutoi, simple taich is, what does it mean b'meinida yischata? So Rashi says, chitu izev, this cleanup is letaroi mitumas mes, is to clean it from the tumas mes. So too, tzrichim hakelim gil litaram, so too the kelim needs a kashering to purify them, min ha'isur, v'chitui litaram min hatuma. The Rabbi Seinu Darshu and the Rabbi Seinu, remember, underline the words that the teachers teach us, mikan sha'af lahachshira min ha'isur hitin tvila, even when it's not tumas mes. When it's Isser, you also need Tvila. Just like you need Tvila from something that has Tuma, you need Tvila from Isser. Wow. The Rebbe is going to say there's a mix-up of words here. There's taram, which means purify, and there is lahachshiram, to kasher. There is Tuma, and there is Isser. What's going on here? It's moving from Pirish Rashi. It's understood from this Rashi. As l'shitosoi, according to Rashi, is the inyan for Tevilas Kelim. The reason why a person is obligated to dunk a keli into a mikvah, verbunden mit Isser. It has to do with Isser. As Rashi says, lahachshira mina Isser. It's not only that it's going from a Goyish domain into a Yiddish domain. It actually has to have an Isser attached to it. Says the Rebbe, that doesn't make sense. Because we all know the halacha that a brand new keli that has no Isser attached to it has to be brought into the mikveh. Is aber schwer, der din is doch, as euch kelim chadashim seine mechuyev v'tvila, even brand new kelim have to be put into the mikveh. Chod ze haben nitten ze euch kent, chod ze haben nitten ze kein blias Isser, even though they have no taste of Isser inside. And with the Gemara is Masbir, and the Gemara says, because old ones that you burn out is considered new. Nevertheless, it has to be brought in the mikveh, because any time a keli changes from a lower kedusha to a higher kedusha needs mikveh. If so, why is Rashi title it with Isser? Nachmer, Rashi alone ties the verta from Sima Pasuk. Rashi alone. At the end of this pasuk quotes, "V'chol asher lo yaveh ba'esh, ta'aviru b'mayim." Anything that didn't absorb taste through fire, just have to put it into the mikveh. Says Rashi, "V'chol asher lo yaveh ba'esh, kol davar she'ein tashmisha yidei v'lo yibolu iser." It never even absorbed iser. Nevertheless, ta'aviru b'mayim, matbila, you put it into the mikveh v'daya. So Rashi himself says, Isser is not to make it or break it, whether you need Tvila. As the Kalim Loibalu Isser, if the Kalim did not absorb Isser, the Pasuzogin as Medarze Toivos, how does it make sense to say that yet the reason for Tvilas Kalim is Lachshira Mina Isser? There is no Isser. So there's something missing here that we have to understand. And the Rebbe is going to be Mechadish. Yes, there is no Isser, but you only have to put in the mikveh something that had potential to have an Isser inside. If it didn't even have potential, then you're free to go. And that's going to be the answer to all previous questions. That's very verstandig. All these issues will be understood by Haknan Damdiak and Rashi. Based on one more point that you can see that Rashi stresses. By Gil, when it talks about kashering, Rashi as does tut oif l'tahara min iser. That when you kasher a kelim, you extract the iser, you're extracting it to make it tahar, pure. Masha'enkim betvila, when Rashi discusses what does mikveh do, zokter de loshen lahachshira min iser. Over there it doesn't say to make it pure, it says to make it kosher. What's the difference between making it pure or making it kosher? The Yeshleimar, says the Rebbe, and it could be kashering, burning out the taste, makes it pure. Toiveling makes it kosher. What's the difference? As medemshina aloshin, just by the way Rashi changes his wording, Tzivishin Hagala. By Hagala, he says, Litaram. And by Tvila, he says, Lahachshiram. Is Rashi Mivar the Chiluk, Tzvishin Hagala and Tvila. This is where Rashi sheds light. What is the basic difference between Kashering Kalim and Toivelin Kalim? The Geder from Tahara, when you say you want to purify a Kali, is Shaykh. When does something have to be purified? Nor by azach was hatten sich tuma. Something which is impure, you have to make it pure. Or there is something that has bad, prohibited taste, you got to make it take out the taste. When the riber werd hagala, and therefore the concept of kashering was nemt aruis the metzias isim was balu and keli. When you kasher, you're extracting the bad taste on the roof, and then it makes sense to say. L'tara min ha'isur. You're purifying it. It was impure, and now you're making it pure. L'hachshiron. However, to make it kosher, what does hachshara mean? Is viloshin hachana. It's like preparing. It's not purifying, it's preparing. What is it preparing it for? The keli vert muchanu muchshar to kennen benutzen sich mit there. Right now, if you go through this process, it is kosher, it is prepared, ready for you to use it for whatever you want. Just haste. In other words, says the Rebbe, the accomplishment, what you're looking to do when you toivel a keli, is nitzu arois nemen the mitzia se'issa from the keli. It's not to take something out that's not supposed to be there. That already was accomplished when you kasher the keli. Either it was accomplished, or maybe there was nothing to do, because there was never Isser in there. You didn't have to extract anything yet from it. So why do you have to go to the mikveh? Now, to machen die Kli muchshe for hishtamshes von Aiden, to make this vessel, this utensil, usable for a Jew, versus mushlo for the Isser, a Yid has to live his life. Is Isser is non-existent. Not only it's non-existent to do an Isser, it's even non-existent for nefshoris va'aluli Isser. A Yid has to live his life that the possibility to do an Isser is non-existent. It's when the keli is in reshus v'nachi, when the guy is in the possession of a guy. Let's say the guy didn't even use it, but because in the possession of a guy, potentially it could have been used as a not bad thing, for a bad thing. That's already not good. We have to do something to rip out that potential. We have to put it in a different league. That's where the mikveh comes in. So whether or not the guy used it, going from a Goyish domain to a Yiddish domain needs mikveh. Is Abadati the Afsharius, even when it's in the Goyish domain, at least there was the possibility as a result that he could have used it for Isser. Und der Riber, and therefore, when the Kli geht der Riber in the Reshus Mayid, when the Keli passes and comes into the domain of a Yid, to a Hishtamshus, was in ear is nitra afilu the ifsharius from benutzen sich mit advar Isser. A Yid lives his life that I don't even allow it enter a possibility of a dvar Isser. Darf die Kli haben tefillah. That's why you put in the mikvah lahachshira min Isser, to make it right, to make it suitable for a new. It's like elevating in a keli to their palace. And the Rebbe in the brackets brings a comparison. I'll show you a comparison. When it said you had to go to war against the people of Midian, kill out all the women of Midian. So over there it says, any woman that was able to live with a man has to be killed. Says the Rebbe, it doesn't mean if she actually lived with a man. Any woman who's mature and knowledgeable and old enough to be able to live with a man, she already is done, even though she might have not. So the same over here, the potential of the Isser is about we're looking to get rid of. Und der Far darf in euch Kelim Chadashim. This is also the reason why brand new Kelim, other divas tashmishin betzoyna, or even kelim that were used only cold, they still hub and tefillah. They still need to be brought to the mikveh. Hagam as loy balu Isser, even though they didn't absorb Isser. Val midem alein, because just by the very fact that they were in the domain of a guy, zayin ze gevarim roi to the meaning of Isser. They became in the league, in the potential possibility of doing Isser. That's bad, and we have to uproot that by putting that in the mikveh. Oizvo. Says the Rebbe, if you look at it that way, you understand all my questions. Based on this view, the three previous questions all get answered. Aleph, the first question was, why the Ramban's question is why Hagalas Kalim is mentioned by Midyan and not by Sichin. And the Ramban's question was not why Tvilas Kalim wasn't mentioned by Sichin. Question one. Beis, why don't you have to put them, when you after Pesach, when you get the Kalim back from the Goy, why don't you have to put them in the mikveh? And Gimel, wie haben die Jiden bald nach Matan Torah sich gekannt benutzen mit der Kalim shel chalav on tefillah? How could the Yidden on the day of Matan Torah, when they just got the mitzvah of shchita, how are they able to eat milchik with the old utensils when the old utensils weren't brought into the mikveh? The same answer will give clarity to all three questions. Aleph, the Ramban stellt sich doch auf Pirush Rashi. The Ramban begins his conversation by quoting the words for Rashi. Is maitik loshen Rashi. He quotes the words for Rashi, and is in mefalpel and he discusses it, a pilpul. Or Rashi sagt, as tvila is kedei lachshiram mina iser. Rashi says that why are we putting the keli in the mikveh? To make it kosher from iser, make it ready from iser. Whoa, says the Rebbe, when the Ramban sees those words in Rashi, Ramban doesn't have to ask a separate question, not only why Hagalas Kalim isn't mentioned earlier, why wasn't Tevila also mentioned earlier? Because if Rashi is looking at it as Isser, hello, there was no Isser before. Because Sichem va'oig, just like the Gemara says at that point, even Chazer was mutter to them. So if there was no Isser, there's no point in Tevila either. Because if it's you're only toiveling mina Isser, I don't have to ask a question about Tevila. Since the Gemara said that by Milchem Sichel va'oig, I feel the kadol the Chazeri ishtarlahu is oich guilty of Tevila. The same reason would apply of Tevila. The Baal by Milchem Sichel va'oig is in Ganzen that given together for Isser. Since during that war there was nothing prohibited. Varim afilu kadol the Chazeri ishtarlahu, even Chazer was permitted. Is Memela oich kein art that given if shari is Isser. If nothing was usher, there was no potential shel isser. If there was no even potential shel isser, why would I have to kasher it? You only have to kasher something that a goy could have even had a potential. Maybe he didn't do it, even if he didn't do it. But at that point, there was no potential shel isser because everything was mutter. Varim then kommt der isser from tvila lachshira mina isser. That's why there is no question. That's why Tevilas Kalim only has only mentioned now by Midyan. Beis Mechiras Chametz. The issue I said, why after Pesach don't you have to take the Kalim and put it in the mikveh? Chach mefakoyv taking them chametz and Kalim chamutz sim goy. Even though you're selling chametz the items and you're selling him the utensils. You're selling him the actual kalim, the half taste in there. You're even giving him the keys from the chadarim, from the rooms, where the kalim are. In other words, he really claims ownership on these kalim. Says the Rebbe, nevertheless, it's sold in such a way that you know in advance, as gleich noch Pesach, wird es zurückgehört zum Yid. You know that right now it's fully sold, but you know that after Pesach we're coming back to buy it back. And it's totally not common as the guys or the poil nutzen them on the kalim. It's not possible. It never happens that the guy actually uses because he owns it for X amount of days. Let him eat something, drink something, cook something. That never happens. Till we even find that it's mentioned in Achreinim, the Rebbe says it's mentioned in the Stei Chemed. Vazogin, as the ganze Inyan from Mechiras Chametz says, Ke'ena Haramba, because we all know that after Pesach we're exchanging it back, it sort of looks like a trick. Now the Gabi Chametz is das Oich Maspik. Nevertheless, concerning the sale of Chametz, will allow such a sale. Now this is a trick that Alter Rebbe is very worrisome about, and the Alter Rebbe insists that you have to add other kabbalah to make it less tricky. It's a real sale. But the bottom line is, it's a real sale. Well, let's get back in a week. Maybe I'll buy it back. So because it's set up that way, about the mechira is an oifen as the guy of sharis and in the kalim. The guy usually doesn't even have the potential to make an isser use this keli from the isser. So it's lacking even the usage of a potential isser. So why should I have to go to the mikveh? The Rebbe doesn't say that came to Vila lachshiram in the isser. When in a fall, when the goy vet yenduts in the kalim, and if the goy decides on Pesach he does want to use the kalim, guess what? Then tvila alone is not even good. Then you actually have to kasher it and table it. Demol vel ze haben euch nicht nur the chiyuv von tvila, nor euch the chiyuv von hagala. Gimel. Machale chalav b'shvuos, concerning the last issue, how did the Yidden eat milk and shvuos when they had the old utensils and they should have put in the mikveh? Wrong. Vigeret, as we spoke before, is ein in Eden for Matan Torah gewesen upgeten basa b'chalav. Before Matan Torah, the Yidden already were careful not to mix meat and milk, right? Uvamela is nit nor vazer kli chalav hambeg pile nitkat can't believe iser. Is not only that their milchig dishes didn't have any iser in it because the Yidden were preparing for Matan Torah. No machmer, the Yidden prepared in such a way to Matan Torah, says nit geven kain sharius of them. The Yidden lived a life preparing for Matan Torah that was staying away from any possibility of iser. So even though they changed status from non-Jew to Jew, but there was no sharius shel iser. Therefore, when they actually became the Jewish people, even though they upped up their game, they still don't have to put it in the mikveh. Says by the kalim, because the utensils that you had, nit shayich and inyan lachshiram and iser. There is no need to make them better, make them roy to get them to the next step, because they never had in the earlier stage, even before they were Jewish, a possibility to do Isser.